Scary telling.
I had been looking forward to movie night with my best friend, Rachel, all week. We always had so much fun watching cheesy horror movies and making fun of them. But when 8 p.m. came around and Rachel hadn't shown up, I started to get worried. I tried calling her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. That's when I knew something was wrong. I tried to stay calm and rationalize that maybe Rachel had gotten caught up in something or forgotten our plans. But as time passed and she still hadn't shown up, my worry turned into panic. I called her again and again, but her phone remained silent. I even called her parents to see if they knew where she was, but they hadn't heard from her either. I tried to distract myself by watching some TV, but I couldn't focus. Every sound outside made me jump and wonder if Rachel was finally coming. But she never did. As the night dragged on, my fear and anxiety grew. I started to think of all the terrible things that could have happened to Rachel. What if she had been in an accident? What if she had been kidnapped? What if she was lying hurt somewhere and couldn't call for help? I stayed up all night, waiting and hoping for any sign of Rachel. But she never came, and I was left alone with my fear and worry. The next morning, I tried calling Rachel again, but her phone was still off. I knew I had to do something. I started calling mutual friends and asking if they had heard from her. But nobody had. I even drove to her apartment complex, hoping to find her there, but her car wasn't in the parking lot. As the hours turned into days, my worry turned into despair. I couldn't eat or sleep, and my mind was constantly racing with questions and fears. What had happened to Rachel? Why wasn't anyone responding to my calls and messages? It felt like the world was spinning out of control, and I was powerless to stop it. All I could do was wait and hope that Rachel would come back to me. But deep down, I knew that something was very, very wrong. After a few days of waiting and hoping for Rachel to come back, I realized that I couldn't just sit around and do nothing. I had to take action and find out what had happened to her. I started by calling Rachel's family members and close friends. Nobody had heard from her, and nobody knew where she could be. I asked if they had noticed anything unusual or if Rachel had mentioned anything that might give me a clue, but they hadn't. Feeling frustrated and scared, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started scouring social media and local news reports for any information that might help me find Rachel. I spent hours scrolling through her Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter accounts trying to find any clues. It was then that I saw a post from Rachel's sister. She had posted a message asking for anyone with information about Rachel's whereabouts to come forward. I immediately messaged her back, asking if there was anything else I could do to help. We exchanged phone numbers, and I promised to keep her updated on any news. The next day, I went to the park where Rachel's phone had been found. It was a popular spot for joggers and dog walkers, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that there was something eerie and unsettling about it. I asked around, but nobody had seen anything out of the ordinary. As the days turned into a week, I started to feel like I was hitting a dead end. Nobody had seen or heard anything, and my own searches had yielded no results. I felt like I was going crazy with worry and fear. One night, while lying in bed, I suddenly had a thought. Rachel had been wearing a distinctive necklace that I had given her for her birthday. It was a silver chain with a small, turquoise pendant. I couldn't remember if she had been wearing it when we last spoke, but I knew it was worth a shot. The next morning, I went to Rachel's apartment and asked her landlord if I could take a look inside. He hesitated at first, but when I explained the situation, he agreed to let me in. I searched Rachel's bedroom, looking for any signs of a struggle or anything that might give me a clue. That's when I saw a small silver chain lying on her dresser. My heart sank as I realized that it was the necklace I had given her. Rachel would never leave it behind unless something was seriously wrong. That's when I knew that I had to step up my search efforts. I started knocking on doors and asking neighbors if they had seen or heard anything unusual in the past week. I visited local businesses and showed them a picture of Rachel, asking if anyone had seen her. But nobody had. I was starting to feel like I was losing hope, but I knew that I had to keep searching. I couldn't let Rachel disappear without a trace. As the search for Rachel continued, I started to feel more and more frustrated. Nobody had seen or heard anything, and all of my searches had turned up nothing. But I refused to give up. I knew that I had to find Rachel, no matter what it took. I started to investigate on my own, visiting places that Rachel liked to go and talking to people who knew her. I went to her favorite coffee shops, bookstores, and restaurants, hoping that someone might have seen her or had information that could help me. As I talked to people, I started to uncover some unsettling truths about Rachel's life. I learned that she had recently gone through a difficult breakup and that she was having some problems at work. I started to wonder if there was someone in her life who might have had a motive to hurt her. One day, while visiting a local thrift store that Rachel liked to shop at, I overheard a conversation between two employees. They were talking about a strange person who had been hanging around the store lately, asking questions about Rachel. My heart started pounding as I realized that this might be a clue. I approached the employees and asked them to tell me more about the person. They said that he had come in several times, asking about Rachel and seeming really interested in her. They described him as tall, with dark hair and a beard. I thanked them for their help and went home, feeling more determined than ever to find Rachel. Over the next few days, I started to investigate the man that the thrift store employees had described. I spent hours searching social media and public records, trying to find any information about him. I eventually found a picture of him on Facebook and his name, Alex. I knew that I had to talk to Alex and find out what he knew about Rachel's disappearance. I started going to places where he might hang out, hoping to run into him. It took several days, but I finally saw him at a local bar one evening. I approached him and introduced myself, pretending that I didn't know anything about Rachel's disappearance. He seemed friendly enough, but I could tell that he was guarded. I asked him if he knew Rachel, and he said that he had met her a few times at the thrift store. He didn't seem to know much else about her. I thanked him for his time and left the bar, feeling frustrated. I knew that he was lying to me, but I didn't know how to prove it. I decided to keep investigating him, hoping that I might stumble upon something that could help me. The next day, I received a message from an anonymous source. It was a cryptic message with a clue that led me to a secluded location in the woods. I wasn't sure if it was a trap or if it was something real, but I knew that I had to check it out. When I arrived at the location, I found a small clearing with a circle of rocks in the middle. I searched around the area, and that's when I found a small piece of fabric that looked like it had been torn from Rachel's sweater. My heart sank as I realized that Rachel had been in this place. But where was she now? And who had left the clue for me? I knew that I was getting closer to the truth, but I also knew that I was in danger. Someone was watching me, and I didn't know who. The discovery of the torn fabric from Rachel's sweater left me shaken and more determined than ever to find her. I knew that I had to be careful and stay alert, but I also knew that time was running out. I decided to investigate the secluded location where I had found the torn fabric more closely. I searched the area around the circle of rocks and found several more clues that suggested Rachel had been there. There were cigarette butts, a lighter, and a water bottle with the same brand of mineral water that Rachel always drank. As I searched the area, I felt like someone was watching me. I kept looking over my shoulder, but I didn't see anyone. I knew that I had to be careful, but I also knew that I had to keep investigating. That's when I received another anonymous message. It was a picture of a dark SUV parked outside of Rachel's apartment complex. The message said that the SUV had been seen there several times in the past few days and that the driver had been watching the building. I knew that I had to investigate the SUV and find out who was driving it. I went to Rachel's apartment complex and found the SUV parked in a spot near her building. I didn't recognize the driver, but I took a picture of the license plate and made a mental note of the make and model of the car. I started to investigate the SUV, searching for any clues that might help me find Rachel. I noticed that there was a small GPS tracker attached to the underside of the car. I carefully removed it and put it in my pocket. I went back to my car and started to follow the SUV, hoping that it might lead me to Rachel. After a few minutes, the SUV pulled into a parking garage in a downtown area. I parked my car nearby and waited, watching to see who would get out of the SUV. After a few minutes, I saw the driver of the SUV get out and walk toward a nearby building. I followed him, staying several feet behind. He went into a small office building and took the elevator to the 5th floor. I followed him into the elevator and pretended to be looking at my phone. When the elevator doors opened, I stayed a few steps behind him, keeping my head down. I followed him down a hallway and stopped outside a door. I could hear voices coming from inside. I knew that I had to be careful, but I also knew that I had to find out what was going on. I pressed my ear to the door and listened. I could hear Rachel's voice, but it sounded faint and far away. There were other voices too, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. Suddenly, the door opened and I was face to face with the driver of the SUV. He looked surprised to see me and reached for something in his pocket. I panicked and lunged forward, knocking him to the ground. As he fell, something fell out of his pocket. It was a small, silver key. I grabbed it and ran into the room. Inside, I found Rachel tied up and gagged. She was pale and looked like she had been drugged. There were 2 other men in the room, and they looked surprised to see me. One of them pulled out a knife, and I knew that I was in trouble. I lunged forward and grabbed the knife out of his hand. We struggled for a few seconds, but I managed to disarm him. The other man tried to grab me from behind, but I kicked him in the stomach and he fell to the ground. I quickly untied Rachel and helped her up. We ran out of the room and down the hallway. As Rachel and I ran down the hallway, I could hear the men behind us shouting and cursing. I knew that we had to get out of the building and fast. We reached the elevator and pressed the button frantically. The doors opened and we stepped inside, hitting the close button as quickly as we could. I could hear the men pounding on the elevator doors, but they didn't open. As we rode the elevator down, Rachel and I hugged each other, both of us shaking with fear and relief. We stepped out of the elevator and ran out of the building, not stopping until we were several blocks away. We found a coffee shop and went inside, collapsing into chairs at a table in the back. Rachel was still pale and shaky, but she was alive. I couldn't believe that we had found her and that we had rescued her from those men. Rachel started to tell me what had happened to her. She said that she had been walking to my apartment when someone had grabbed her from behind and put a bag over her head. She had been drugged and taken to a remote location where the men had interrogated her about me and her life. They had asked her questions about where she lived, who her friends were, and what she knew about me. Rachel had been terrified and didn't know what to say. Eventually, they had tied her up and left her in the room where I had found her. I couldn't believe that someone had gone to such lengths to hurt Rachel and get to me. But as Rachel and I talked, it became clear that the men had been hired by someone who wanted to get revenge on me for something. I knew that I had to find out who was behind this and stop them before they hurt anyone else. Over the next few days, Rachel and I worked together to track down the men who had kidnapped her. We gave the information to the police, and they were able to arrest them and charge them with kidnapping and assault. But even though the men were behind bars, I still felt a sense of unease. I knew that there was someone out there who wanted to hurt me and that I had to find out who it was. Rachel and I started to investigate on our own, looking for any clues that might lead us to the person behind the kidnapping. We talked to people who knew me and Rachel, trying to find someone who might have a motive. Eventually, we found a lead. It was someone who had a grudge against me and who had been talking about me and Rachel to other people. We brought the information to the police, and they were able to arrest the person. In the end, Rachel and I were able to find the person behind the kidnapping and bring them to justice. But the experience had left us both shaken and changed. We realized how fragile our lives were and how important it was to look out for each other. We promised to always be there for each other, no matter what.